For more, we have joining us today Dr. Myong-hyun, a research fellow from the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. It's good to have you back on the show.
My pleasure.
So Pompeo has said they will try to go, if I quote directly, as far down the road as they can before the meeting between Kim Jong-un and Trump in just under 2 weeks' time. What does he mean by that, do you think?
Well, they're trying to come up with as much agreement as possible before the two leaders actually meet in Hanoi. So I think what Secretary Pompeo referring to is that there's a lot of outstanding issues between the two countries at the moment, and there seems to be not a clear agreement on the what kind of denuclearization steps North Korea is going to take. So I think the United States will try to make that clear as much as possible before, and then come out with a very concrete result before having the summit. And I think by that he means that he wants to get at least some concrete denuclearization measures, such as shutting down the Yongbyon or Donghaeri or Pungchangri test sites. So we'll see what happens. But I think he's trying to put a very positive spin, but then also indicates that they have a very hard negotiations going on.
I mean, you say it's a positive spin, but for me it sounds like it's almost like they're giving up at this point. It's like, we'll see the best of what we can do with the time we have left. Because they seem to have set the date, but then not really talked about, what they're going to arrange. So do we have to lower our expectations about what we can expect from the summit, do you think?
So I think from media reports so far have indicated that the United States government has lowered its expectation about the upcoming summit. Actually, President Trump himself has lowered expectation about the summit because he started mentioning less about complete denuclearization of North Korea, but more about stability and peace. So it shows that even President Trump's expectation of the summit is quite different from what some people might expect here in Seoul or Washington, which is complete denuclearization of North Korea. So this time around, we will see probably is that the two countries are agreed to take some concrete measures that shows that the summit had a concrete outcome. But then when it comes to a true challenge of a negotiation, which is for North Korea to produce a very detailed roadmap for denuclearization, that might happen down the road, maybe in the next couple of summits later. But then it's clear that the second summit is actually gearing up to be a little bit more underwhelming than people had expected.
Yes, because the denuclearization issue is what most people are interested in. But they're seem to be more and more about peace and stability. There was we saw in that report, Pompeo, he talked about how they're looking to reduce tensions. They've talked about reducing military risk. In another interview, he talked about peace and security mechanisms. So it seems like the US are kind of moving the goalposts and trying to change our expectations about what we can expect from this next summit then.
So I think we're trying to really enrich the main offer menu for the North Koreans. I think what North Koreans are asking the United States to do in exchange for denuclearization concessions was relieving North Korea of sanctions measures that are arrayed against it right now. And that's something that the United States is not really willing to do at this point. So I think trying to spice up the offer a little bit, I think the United States has put on the table security guarantee measures and the confidence building measures that actually South Korea has been talking about with North Korea for a while. So I think it's a way to complement the quote-unquote little bit of meager offer that the U.S. can muster at the moment to somehow entice North Koreans come to the negotiation table and come out with concessions.
So the next round of working level talks between the US and North Korean officials is expected to take place as early as this weekend. But still, that doesn't leave only about 10 days left till the actual summit. I mean, if there's so much, I guess, there's left to talk about, but what do you think they'll be trying to tackle? Well,
I think we only, as you mentioned, there are only 10 days left until the summit. So I think when it comes to concrete, very most important agenda of denuclearization, that's already done. There's not much they can do at the moment. So probably what they're discussing right now are the logistics and the protocols of the summit itself. So that, essentially what's gearing up to be is that we are going to have a summit, but when it comes to actual talk, we might not see concrete results.
It looks like Trump will be signing the spending bill in the US to avoid another government shutdown. Now, we want to talk about this as well because previously when we thought that there was potential of another shutdown in the US, there was speculation that Trump might not be able to hold the summit in Vietnam as originally planned. But now that it looks like that issue is being resolved. Do you think Trump will be able to focus on this summit in Vietnam more closely?
So I think for President Trump, there's even stronger incentive right now to come to Vietnam and hold the second summit with Kim Jong-un, because he hasn't been scoring victories on the domestic front. I mean, the outcome of the standoff when it comes to building the wall between the U.S. and Mexico, that didn't turn out too well for him. I mean, essentially, he had to back down in front of the Democrats' pressure on the budget and all that. So I think he needs to score another victory, but this time on the foreign policy front. And that's why he's very eager to come to Hanoi and give out the perception that the progress is being made on the denuclearization front with North Korea.
But if what we've talked about today, about what the expectations of what they'll be able to reach won't be that much on denuclearization, be probably more on security and safety kind of mechanisms, then wouldn't his critics use that as ammunition to say that he's also failed on that front as well?
Well, his critics have been pointing that out for a while now, actually ever since the first summit in Singapore. So, and then we already know the President Trump's line of defense against that kind of argument. I mean, he basically saying that unlike any previous U.S. president, he's been able to somehow convince North Koreans to back down from a very serious provocation against the U.S. homeland. And right now, there's a peace and stability in the Korean Peninsula. That's been his line of defense against the criticism that there hasn't been a very concrete advance when it comes to denuclearization. So I think he's going to stick to that line. And I mean, there'll be more criticism, but then it's difficult to argue against that in a way. I mean, different option that outweighs with alternative for the United States other than holding talks with North Korea at this point. So I think that's something that Trump is going to emphasize on over and over. So we'll be in a state of mild discontent because we don't see progress being made on the denuclearization front. But at the same time, we have to be, we have to recognize the fact that the fact that there's stability in the Korean Peninsula is an achievement.
Let's now turn to the relations between Vietnam and North Korea as well, because the Vietnamese foreign minister was in Pyongyang for 3 days this week, and he looks like he's returned back to his home after arranging details for, we can assume, for Kim's visit. But on his way back, he seemed to stop by in Beijing. Now, do you think there's any chance that the Vietnamese foreign minister will have spoken to Beijing officials about what they discussed as well and act as some sort of information like middleman?
Well, I would be surprised if he did so. I mean, actually, it's a professional courtesy for a visiting diplomat to, talk to his or her counterpart in the country that he or she is visiting. So I'm sure the Vietnamese foreign minister shares some notes with his Chinese counterparts. There's no surprise there. But at the same time, I don't think Vietnam is privy to the actual details of the denuclearization negotiation between North Korea and the United States. Vietnam is just the host for a summit. So when it comes to the contentious point of denuclearization, that's a very secret detail that's privy to only 2 countries, or maybe China, but that's it.
Can we safely assume now that Kim Jong-un will be making a state visit to Vietnam like he did in Singapore?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the only other time a North Korean leader visited Vietnam was at least 55 years ago, when during the time of Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-un's grandfather. So I think it's necessary for actually North Korea to pay a state visit, if it's okay, to Vietnam, because Vietnam is it's a communist ally for North Korea, and then North Korea was assisted militarily for Vietnam during the Vietnamese War. So I think it's a way for North Korea to continue with its diplomatic outreach that started after meeting with South Korean President Moon Jae-in, and visiting Beijing, and also meeting with the U.S. presidents. So definitely they are going to have, North Korea is going to have a state visit to Vietnam.
As you mentioned there, North Korea and Vietnam does have quite a lot of history together. As you said, Kim Il-sung visited in 55 years ago. So, can you tell us more about this relationship that North Korea and Vietnam have and the history of it?
Well, when you look at the background, the genesis of these 2 countries are quite similar. I mean, they have to fight off the United States in a war, and in case of Vietnam, Vietnam won the war. When it comes to Korean War, they reached a stalemate, and at the same time, they continue with their communist revolution in their home countries. And then essentially the communist idea is all about worldwide global revolution, and the communist countries have to help each other. And North Korea and Vietnam actually lived up to the expectation. So there's this camaraderie going on between the two countries. But surprisingly now, when it comes to actual diplomatic or economic exchanges, they have been pretty muted in the recent years, especially because Vietnam engaged in very aggressive economic reform policy, unlike North Korea. So I think there's an incentive for North Korea to, in addition to having this paying a diplomatic courtesy call to the leader of Vietnam, it's a chance for Kim Jong-un to witness the impact of economic reform in Vietnam, and maybe Kim Jong-un can take a lesson or two from there.
That's what I was going to ask you next, actually. So obviously Kim Jong-un is coming to Vietnam for the summit with President Trump, but he might be arriving even a couple of days earlier to have the state visit with Vietnam. What would Kim Jong-un possibly want to get out of this state visit and meeting with the leader of Vietnam?
Well, one way for him to see what happened with a communist country that engaged in very serious economic reform measures. Vietnam is a major success story when it comes to transitioning from a centrally planned economy to an open market economy. So I think we believe that Kim Jong-un aspires to introduce some sort of reform measures to the North Korean economy. So maybe it's an opportunity for him to see what have been the impact of these reformist policies in Vietnam. So there's that. And also there's an added value of him projecting this perception that he's a reform-minded leader of North Korea that is different from his predecessors, and at the same time insinuate in a way that North Korea is willing to negotiate with the international community to reduce maybe a little bit of its nuclear capability in exchange for economic assistance and economic reform as well. So I think there's a public campaign, information campaign kind of aspect to his visit. At the same time, hopefully, there's also a purpose of learning from the ground about the economic reform.
One more point I'd like to go back to before we end the show as well. So Pompeo, he also said that Trump is probably likely to discuss with Kim Jong-un about the declaration to end the Korean War. And so with these kind of suggestions, it was perhaps hoped early on that there could be a four-way meeting even between Trump, Kim, and President Moon, and even President Xi about making progress towards an end-of-war declaration and even a peace treaty down the line. But it seems like it won't be happening, and the Blue House has said that it's very unlikely. Did it always seem like a stretch too far that they could have had like President Moon going to Vietnam for this summit as well?
Well, yeah, it's a little bit of a far-fetched idea to begin with, because we know for a fact that the declaration to end the war was actually top of the wish list for South Korea only. It wasn't really a priority for neither North Korea or the United States. So the fact that we kept hearing about the declaration to end the war was a part of a package to offer to North Koreans for them to make a concessions on the denuclearization front was a little bit far-fetched from my point of view, at least. And so the fact that President Moon won't be going to Hanoi this time to participate in the 3- or 4-way meeting to sign the declaration to end the war is actually natural, because in a way, because it actually shows that North Korea is more interested in seeing material concessions from the United States in the form of sanctions relief. So when it comes to symbolic measures such as declaring the end of the war, it probably can happen down the road, or maybe in Seoul, South Korea, if Kim Jong-un ever decides to visit after his visit meeting with President Trump. But at Hanoi, I think it's going to be a very realistic negotiation on the denuclearization and sanctions.
But Pompeo has said that he expects Trump and Kim to discuss it at least during these the summit.
So, but I think there will be a lot of crosstalk between the United States and North Korea. I think the United States will make a gesture to put the declaration to end the war as an offer to incentivize the North Koreans to concede on denuclearization. But the North Koreans are going to insist that what they really want in exchange for denuclearization will be sanctions relief, and declaration to end the war can happen down the road.
That's where we'll wrap things up. Thank you for coming in today and sharing
My
us
pleasure.
your thoughts.